The bedroom door was wide open, but Jungkook was gone. Jimin froze when he saw the untouched bed, an empty suitcase, and a small white envelope resting beside a silver ring. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a wedding invitation with Jungkook's name printed beneath the words groom. Then Jimin's phone vibrated. One message appeared: "Don't look for him. You have no idea why he chose this." Jimin stared at the message until the screen slowly dimmed in his hand. He pressed it awake again, as if the words might change if he looked at them one more time. They did not. "Don't look for him. You have no idea why he chose this." The sentence was short, but it felt heavier than the envelope sitting on Jungkook's bed. For several seconds, Jimin could not move. Outside the room, the hallway remained strangely quiet. No footsteps. No voices. No sound of Jungkook laughing from another room. Nothing. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner and the ticking of a small clock above the desk. Jimin looked back at the bed. Jungkook had always been careless about leaving things behind. A jacket on a chair. Headphones beside the pillow. A half-finished bottle of water on the floor. But this time, the room looked deliberately empty. His suitcase was gone. Several shirts were missing from the closet. The charging cable beside the bed had been unplugged. Even the small black notebook Jungkook usually kept hidden beneath a stack of magazines was nowhere to be found. Someone had not simply walked out. Someone had prepared to leave. And Jimin had not been told. He slowly picked up the wedding invitation again. The paper was thick and expensive, the kind people used for ceremonies meant to look perfect in photographs. Jungkook's name was printed clearly. The other name was covered by a strip of folded paper attached to the invitation. Jimin's fingers moved toward it, but stopped. Something inside him suddenly resisted knowing. Because if he pulled that strip away, the mystery would become real. And if it became real, he would have to accept the possibility that Jungkook had made the biggest decision of his life without him. Why? The word escaped Jimin's lips so quietly that even he almost didn't hear it. He looked at the silver ring again. It was not on the invitation. It was simply placed beside it. Plain. Elegant. Almost too simple for a wedding ring. Jimin turned it over. There was a tiny engraving inside. 3 words. "You said tomorrow." His breathing changed. The sentence meant something. He knew it did. But he could not remember when Jungkook had said it. Or why. Jimin closed his eyes, searching through memories, but instead of an answer, another image came back to him. Jungkook standing by the window 2 weeks earlier, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. "Do you ever think people can miss their chance without realizing it?" Jungkook had asked. Jimin had laughed because he thought it was another one of those strange questions Jungkook sometimes asked late at night. "Everyone misses chances," he had answered. "You just take another one." Jungkook had looked at him for a long time. Not always. At the time, Jimin had not understood why those 2 words sounded almost like goodbye. Now he did. Or at least he thought he did. His phone vibrated again. Jimin looked down immediately. Another message. This time there was no warning. No explanation. Just an address. A small chapel outside the city. Beneath it was a time. 3 p.m. Jimin looked at the clock. It was 2:17. He felt the blood drain from his face. The wedding was not tomorrow. It was today. He grabbed his jacket and rushed out of the room. But before he reached the elevator, he stopped. His eyes returned to the open bedroom door. Something about the room bothered him. Not the wedding invitation. Not the missing suitcase. It was the way Jungkook had left the place. Too carefully. Too completely. As if he had known that someone would come looking. Jimin walked back inside. He checked the desk again. Nothing. Then he noticed a small scratch beneath the edge of the wooden drawer. It was barely visible. He pulled the drawer open. Empty. He ran his fingers underneath it and felt something taped to the bottom. A folded photograph. Jimin pulled it free. The image was old, slightly faded around the edges. It showed two figures sitting on the floor of an empty practice room. One was Jungkook. The other was Jimin. They were younger, exhausted, and laughing at something outside the frame. Jimin stared at the photograph for a long moment. On the back, written in Jungkook's handwriting, were 6 words. For the day you finally understand. Jimin's chest tightened. He turned the photograph over again. Why would Jungkook leave this behind? Why would he hide it in a drawer? And what exactly was Jimin supposed to understand? He slipped the photograph into his pocket and ran. The elevator doors opened just as he reached them. He stepped inside, pressing the button repeatedly even though it was already lit. As the doors closed, his phone rang. The caller ID made him freeze. Jungkook. For 1 second, Jimin simply stared. Then he answered. Jungkook. Silence. Not complete silence. There was wind on the other end. A distant engine. Then Jungkook's breathing. Where are you? Jimin asked. No answer. Jungkook, please. Just tell me where you are. A few seconds passed. Then Jungkook finally spoke. His voice was lower than usual. Tired. Hyung. Jimin closed his eyes. Hearing that single word almost broke the wall he had built around his fear. Why did you leave without telling me? Another silence. I needed to. For a wedding. Jimin's voice cracked. You're getting married today. Jungkook breathed in slowly. Yes. Jimin felt as though the elevator had suddenly become too small. Who are you marrying? Jungkook did not answer. Jungkook. Don't come. What? Please. Jimin's grip tightened around the phone. You disappear, leave a wedding invitation in your room, send me an address, and then tell me not to come. I didn't send you the address. Jimin stopped breathing for a moment. What? That wasn't my message. The call went silent. Jimin looked at the screen. The unknown number from earlier was still there. His heart began beating faster. Then who sent it? Jungkook's voice became almost a whisper. That's what I'm trying to find out. The call ended. Jimin stood motionless inside the elevator. For the first time since entering Jungkook's room, he understood something terrifying. Maybe Jungkook had not disappeared because he wanted to escape from Jimin. Maybe someone had arranged for Jimin to believe that. And if that was true, the wedding invitation was not necessarily proof of a marriage. It could be a warning. It could be a trap. Or worse, it could be something Jungkook had been forced to accept. The elevator doors opened. Jimin stepped out without knowing where his feet were taking him. His mind returned to the photograph. For the day you finally understand. The sentence had been written long before the invitation appeared. That meant Jungkook had been preparing for something. But how long had he known? The answer took Jimin back to a night months earlier, when everything between them had still seemed simple. It was late. Most of the lights in the building were already off. Jimin had found Jungkook sitting alone in the practice room, staring at his phone. The room was dark except for the blue light from the screen. You're still here? Jimin had asked. Jungkook looked up and smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep. Jimin sat beside him. Why? Nothing. You always say nothing when something is wrong. Jungkook smiled again, but this time there was no humor in it. Maybe I don't know how to explain it. Jimin had looked at him carefully. Try. Jungkook had been silent for a while. Then he asked, if someone you loved asked you to let them go, would you? Jimin had frowned. Why would someone I love ask that? Maybe because staying would hurt them. Then I'd ask them why. And if they wouldn't tell you? Jimin remembered laughing softly. I'd annoy them until they did. Jungkook had lowered his eyes. You really wouldn't let go? No, the answer had come too quickly. Jimin had not thought about it. He had simply said what he felt. Jungkook looked at him then, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. Something that neither of them had the courage to name. What if letting go was the only way to protect them? Jungkook asked. The name on the invitation belonged to someone Jimin had met only once, but that one meeting had been enough to leave a strange impression he could never explain. Her name was Hannah. She had appeared in Jungkook's life months earlier, quietly and without warning, and after that day, something about Jungkook had changed. Jimin remembered the first time he saw them together. It had been raining heavily, the kind of rain that turned the windows silver and made the entire city look distant. Jungkook had been standing beneath the entrance awning, speaking to Hannah in a low voice. She had looked nervous, while Jungkook looked almost defeated. When Jimin approached, Jungkook had immediately stepped away from her. "Who is she?" Jimin had asked later. "Someone I need to help," Jungkook replied. "Help with what?" "It's complicated." Jimin had hated those two words. Complicated. They had become Jungkook's favorite way of ending conversations he did not want to have. Now, sitting alone inside his car with the wedding invitation resting beside him, Jimin finally understood that whatever had been complicated back then had grown into something large enough to make Jungkook leave without saying goodbye. His phone showed 2:31 p.m. The chapel was less than 30 minutes away. Jimin started the engine. He knew Jungkook had told him not to come. But there was something he understood now that he had not understood before. Jungkook had never been good at asking for help. When he was afraid, he became quieter. When he was hurt, he became distant. And when he believed someone he loved would be safer without him, he disappeared. Jimin drove through the rain with both hands locked tightly around the steering wheel. He kept replaying the last few weeks in his head. Jungkook had stopped waiting for him after practice. He had stopped sending random messages late at night. He had started leaving the room whenever Jimin entered. Once, Jimin had asked if something was wrong. Jungkook had smiled and said, "Nothing you need to worry about." That sentence had hurt more than Jimin admitted. Because there had been a time when Jungkook told him everything. Or at least, Jimin had believed he did. The road stretched ahead, wet and gray. At a red light, Jimin looked at the silver ring sitting in the cup holder. He had taken it from the bedroom without realizing he was carrying it. "You said tomorrow." 3 words. A memory suddenly surfaced. It was from nearly a year earlier. They had been sitting on the rooftop after a long night, sharing convenience store coffee while the city lights flickered below them. Jimin had complained about always postponing things. "Tomorrow," Jungkook had said. "We'll do it tomorrow." Jimin had laughed. "You always say tomorrow." Jungkook had looked at him and smiled. "Because I want there to be a tomorrow." Jimin had not understood why that sentence stayed with him. Now he did. The ring's engraving was not about a wedding. It was about a promise. A promise that had somehow become tangled in a secret Jimin knew nothing about. The light turned green. Jimin accelerated. When he reached the chapel, the parking area was almost empty. A black sedan stood near the entrance. 2 other cars were parked farther away. The building itself was small, old, and surrounded by trees. There were no flowers outside. No decorations. No photographers. No guests. Nothing that looked like a wedding. Jimin stepped out of the car. Rain struck his jacket as he hurried toward the entrance. Before he could open the door, someone grabbed his arm. He turned sharply. It was Hannah. Her face was pale. She looked exhausted, as if she had not slept all night. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. Jimin pulled his arm free. "Where is Jungkook?" Hannah looked toward the chapel doors. "Inside." "Is he getting married?" She hesitated. That hesitation was enough to make Jimin's stomach drop. "Answer me." "Not yet." "What does that mean?" Hannah lowered her voice. "The ceremony hasn't started." Jimin stared at her. "Then why is his name on the invitation?" "Because he agreed to it." "Why?" Hannah looked down. "Because he thinks it's the only way to protect you." Jimin went completely still. For a moment, even the rain seemed to disappear. "Protect me from what?" Hannah did not answer. Jimin stepped closer. "You sent me those messages." "No, then who did?" "I don't know." "You expect me to believe that?" Hannah's eyes filled with fear. Jimin, please. You need to understand something. Jungkook didn't leave because he stopped caring about you. Then why did he leave? Because he thought loving you was putting you in danger. Jimin's expression hardened. Danger from whom? Hannah looked toward the chapel again. From the person who has been watching him. Jimin felt his chest tighten. What person? Before Hannah could answer, the chapel doors opened. Jungkook stood there. He was dressed in a dark suit, but he did not look like a groom. He looked like someone waiting for a sentence to be carried out. His hair was neatly styled, but his eyes were tired. When he saw Jimin, his face changed instantly. Shock. Fear. And something painfully close to relief. Why are you here? He asked. Jimin walked toward him. Because you disappeared. I told you not to come. You also told me nothing. Jungkook looked away. You need to leave. No, Jimin. No, his voice shook. Not this time. Jungkook's jaw tightened. You don't understand. Then explain it. I can't. You can. I said I can't. The sudden anger echoed across the empty entrance. Jungkook immediately looked away, breathing hard. Jimin saw the regret in his expression almost instantly. The anger was not really directed at him. It was fear. Fear that Jimin had found him. Fear that everything he had tried to keep hidden was collapsing. Jimin lowered his voice. Look at me. Jungkook did not. Please. Slowly, Jungkook raised his eyes. Jimin had seen him exhausted before. He had seen him frustrated, angry, sick, even broken after difficult days. But this was different. Jungkook looked like someone who had already said goodbye in his mind. Are you marrying Hannah? Jimin asked. Jungkook swallowed. Yes. The answer landed heavily. Even though Jimin had already seen the invitation, hearing it from Jungkook made it real. Do you love her? Jungkook remained silent. Jimin's eyes became wet, but he refused to look away. Do you? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Why? Jimin stared at him. There were 1,000 answers, but none came out. Jungkook's eyes softened. That's exactly why you need to leave. Jimin stepped closer. You think I came here because I want to stop your wedding? Didn't you? I came because I thought something was wrong. Something is wrong. Then let me help. Jungkook shook his head. I can't let you. Why? Jungkook's voice dropped. Because the moment you know everything, you become part of it. Jimin's breathing stopped. Part of what? Jungkook looked behind him. Hannah was still standing nearby, watching them. Not here. Then where? Anywhere except here. Jungkook reached for Jimin's arm, but Jimin pulled away. You don't get to disappear, get engaged, and then decide when I'm allowed to ask questions. Jungkook flinched. I know. Do you? Yes. Then tell me the truth. Jungkook looked at him for a long time. Finally, he said, I never wanted to marry her. Jimin froze. Hannah closed her eyes. The words seemed to change the entire room. Then why are you doing this? Jimin asked. Jungkook's answer came quietly. Because someone made me believe I had no other choice. Before Jimin could respond, a sound came from outside. Tires against wet pavement. Another car had arrived. Jungkook's face immediately changed. He turned toward the parking lot. You have to go. Who is that? Jimin, go. Who? Jungkook grabbed his hand. Please. Jimin felt something in Jungkook's grip. His fingers were trembling. This was not an argument anymore. This was fear. Genuine fear. Jimin looked toward the entrance. A black SUV had stopped near the trees. No one stepped out. The windows were tinted. Jungkook pulled Jimin toward a side hallway. What are you doing? Trust me. You haven't given me a reason to. I know. They moved quickly through the narrow corridor. Hannah followed. Jungkook did not move. His hand remained against the glass, his eyes fixed on the old photograph as though the person standing in the background had somehow stepped out of the past and into the room. Jimin looked from the photograph to Jungkook, waiting for an explanation, but none came. The sound of another car door closing outside made Jungkook finally pull his hand away. "We have to go," he said. "Now." Jimin caught his wrist. "Not until you tell me who that is." "Jimin, please. You just told me he was supposed to be dead." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "I know. Then how is he standing in a photograph at this chapel?" Jungkook looked at Hannah. She had gone completely silent. That silence answered more than words could have. Jimin turned toward her. "You knew." Hannah shook her head quickly. "I knew there was a connection, but I didn't know he was alive." "What connection?" Jungkook asked. Hannah looked at him with fear. "The chapel. The ceremony. The person you were supposed to meet today." Jungkook's expression changed. "What are you talking about?" Hannah reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "This was delivered to me this morning." She handed it to Jungkook. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. There were only 2 lines. "The debt is not yours. It belongs to the person you promised to protect." Beneath the words was a date. The same date as the old photograph. Jimin looked at Jungkook. "What debt?" Jungkook folded the paper immediately. "Nothing." "Stop saying that." Jimin's voice was quiet, but the anger underneath it was unmistakable. "Every time you say nothing, I discover something worse." Jungkook looked away. "Because some truths don't make anything better." "Maybe not. But lies make everything worse." The words landed between them. Jungkook closed his eyes. For a moment, he looked exhausted enough to collapse. Then he said, "His name is Miho." Jimin waited. "He was my father's business partner." Jungkook paused. "And the reason my family disappeared from that city years ago." Jimin's expression softened slightly. "What happened?" Jungkook stared at the photograph. "There was an accident. At least, that's what everyone was told." Everyone. Everyone who was supposed to believe the story. Jimin felt a chill. "And you didn't?" "I was young, but I remembered things." Jungkook's voice became quieter. "I remembered my father arguing with Miho. I remembered my mother crying. I remembered a suitcase being packed in the middle of the night." He swallowed. "And I remembered one sentence." "What sentence?" "My father told me, if anyone asks, you never saw him." Jimin stared at him. "You were a child. That's why everyone thought I would forget." Outside, another vehicle passed slowly along the road. Jungkook waited until the sound disappeared. "Years later, I found out my father hadn't died in the accident everyone talked about." Jimin's eyes widened. "What?" "He disappeared." "And Miho?" "Disappeared too." Jimin looked at the photograph again. "Until now." Jungkook nodded. "Until now." The room suddenly felt colder. Jimin remembered the message that had brought him there. He remembered the warning. He remembered the photograph from his own bedroom. Everything was beginning to connect, but not enough to form a complete picture. "Why does this involve me?" he asked. Jungkook looked at him. "Because you found the notebook." Jimin frowned. "What notebook?" Jungkook's expression told him the question had hit something important. "The black one from my room." "I didn't find it." "Exactly." Jimin stared at him. Jungkook continued, "I hid that notebook because it contains names, dates, and copies of documents I found after I started investigating my father's disappearance." "And someone took it?" "Yes." "When?" 3 nights ago." Jimin remembered the empty drawer. The scratch beneath it. The photograph. Suddenly, he understood why Jungkook's room had felt wrong. Someone had not simply taken the notebook. They had searched the room. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jimin asked. Jungkook gave a bitter smile. Because 2 days before it disappeared, I found your name written inside it. Jimin's face changed. My name. Next to a date. What date? Jungkook hesitated. Tomorrow. Jimin looked at the ring in his hand. You said tomorrow. Jungkook's eyes moved to the engraving. That was never about the wedding. Then what was it about? I wanted to tell you everything tomorrow. Jimin's voice softened. But you didn't. I was afraid. Of me. Of losing you. Jimin looked away. You almost did anyway. Jungkook's eyes lowered. I know. For a brief moment, the tension between them eased. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first honest silence they had shared in months. Then Hannah suddenly whispered, "Someone is coming." Footsteps echoed from the front hallway. Jungkook immediately moved between Jimin and the door. Stay behind me. Jimin almost argued, but stopped when he saw Jungkook's face. There was no anger there. Only instinctive fear. The footsteps came closer. One step. Then another. A shadow passed beneath the door. Jimin held his breath. The handle moved. Jungkook reached for the nearest object he could use as protection. The door opened slowly. But no one entered. Instead, a phone was thrown onto the floor. It slid across the room and stopped near Jimin's shoes. The screen was already playing a video. Jimin bent down and picked it up. The footage showed Jungkook leaving the building earlier that morning. Then the angle changed. It showed Jimin sleeping in his own room. His face was clearly visible. The recording continued. A figure entered the room, opened Jungkook's drawer, searched beneath the bed, and removed the black notebook. Jimin's stomach tightened. Someone had been inside while he was asleep. He looked at Jungkook. You knew. Jungkook shook his head. I knew someone was watching us. I didn't know they had entered your room. The video suddenly stopped. A message appeared on the screen. Now you understand why he had to marry her. Jimin's eyes narrowed. They're still trying to convince me. Jungkook took the phone. Because they need you to believe the wedding was real. Why? Because if you believe I'm choosing Hannah, you'll stop looking for the truth. Jimin looked at him. And if I don't? Jungkook's answer was immediate. They'll make you disappear too. The threat was so direct that nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Jimin stepped closer. You should have trusted me. Jungkook's eyes filled with regret. I thought protecting you meant keeping you away. And now? Now I don't know what protection means anymore. Jimin reached for his hand. Jungkook looked down at their fingers but did not pull away. Maybe protection means letting me choose whether I'm willing to stay, Jimin said. Jungkook looked at him. You shouldn't have to pay for my mistakes. Neither should you. Before Jungkook could answer, the lights went out. The chapel disappeared into darkness. Hannah gasped. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed. Jungkook grabbed Jimin's hand. Stay close. They moved through the hallway using the faint light from their phones. Jimin could hear his own heartbeat. They reached the back entrance, but the door was locked. Jungkook tried the handle again. Nothing. It's been locked from outside, he said. We're trapped. Hannah looked toward the windows. There's another exit downstairs. They hurried down a narrow staircase. At the bottom, Jungkook stopped. There was a wooden table against the wall. On it sat the black notebook. Jimin stared at it. That's the notebook. Jungkook stepped forward slowly. Don't touch it. But Jimin had already noticed something beside it. Another silver ring. Identical to the one from Jungkook's room. He looked at Jungkook. Why are there two? Jungkook's expression changed. There shouldn't be. He approached the table. Under the second ring was a photograph. This one was newer. It showed Jimin and Jungkook standing together outside the building months earlier. On the back was a handwritten sentence. You were warned once. Jungkook's face went pale. Jimin looked at him. Warned about what? Jungkook did not answer. He opened the notebook instead. The rain had stopped by the time Jimin reached the old apartment, but the streets were still shining beneath the pale city lights. He stood outside the door for several seconds without moving, staring at the small brass key in his palm. It was the same key Jungkook had once given him years ago, back when neither of them understood how important that simple gesture would become. Now the key felt heavier than it ever had before. Jimin finally unlocked the door. The apartment was dark, silent, and strangely cold. He stepped inside and immediately noticed the familiar wooden table near the window. The same table where they had shared late-night meals, argued over small things, laughed until they could barely breathe, and once promised that no matter how complicated life became, they would never disappear without telling the other person. Jimin swallowed hard. He had broken that promise first. Jungkook had broken it differently. And now somewhere in the city, Jungkook was preparing to marry someone else. At least, that was what everyone believed. Jimin walked toward the bedroom. The room looked almost untouched. A black jacket hung over the chair. A book lay open beside the bed. On the nightstand was the small silver keychain Jimin had given Jungkook years ago. But something was missing. The photograph. Jimin immediately noticed the empty space on the shelf. There had once been a photograph of the two of them standing beneath a streetlight on a rainy night. Jungkook had kept it there for years. Now the frame was gone. Jimin slowly sat on the edge of the bed. His fingers tightened around the key. "Why would you take that with you?" he whispered. The question sounded almost childish in the empty room. But then his eyes fell on something beneath the pillow. A folded piece of paper. Jimin froze. He pulled it out carefully. There was no envelope. No name on the outside. Only 4 words written in Jungkook's handwriting. "You deserve the truth." Jimin stared at the sentence until his vision blurred. He unfolded the paper. The first line made his heart stop. "I never went there to marry someone." For several seconds, he could not breathe. The room seemed to tilt around him. He read the sentence again, then again, as if the words might change if he looked long enough. But they did not. Jungkook had not gone to the ceremony for the reason everyone had told him. The wedding was real. The invitation was real. The ring was real. But the person Jungkook was supposed to marry was not the whole story. Jimin continued reading. "I went because I had to finish something I should have finished years ago. I thought I could do it without hurting you. I was wrong." His hands began to shake. There was another line beneath it. "If you are reading this, then you finally found the place I was too afraid to show you." Jimin looked around the room. He knew the apartment. He had been there countless times. Yet suddenly every object seemed unfamiliar. He stood and walked toward the bookshelf. One book was pulled slightly forward. He remembered it. Jungkook had always kept it there, even though he rarely talked about it. Jimin pulled it out. Something fell behind it. A small metal box landed softly on the floor. Jimin crouched down. His heart was beating faster now. He opened the box. Inside were several photographs, a hospital bracelet, an old train ticket, and a tiny folded note. Jimin picked up the bracelet first. The name printed on it was Jungkook's. The date was from 6 years earlier. Jimin remembered that date. He had always thought it was the day Jungkook had suddenly disappeared for several days without explanation. He had asked questions back then. Jungkook had refused to answer. It was nothing, he had said. Jimin had believed him because he wanted to believe him. Now he understood that it had never been nothing. Beneath the bracelet was a photograph. Jimin turned it over. His breath caught. It showed Jungkook sitting alone outside a hospital room. His head was lowered. His hands were clasped tightly together. On the back of the photograph was another sentence. "The day I decided to leave was the day I realized I was already afraid of losing you." Jimin closed his eyes. A memory returned with painful clarity. 6 years ago, he had stood in the same apartment, angry because Jungkook had vanished without explanation. When Jungkook finally returned, he had looked exhausted. Jimin had wanted to ask where he had been. Instead, he had asked the easier question. Are you okay? Jungkook had smiled and answered, I'm fine. That smile had fooled him. Or perhaps Jimin had simply accepted the lie because the truth would have required him to admit how deeply he cared. He sat on the floor with the metal box beside him. The pieces were beginning to connect, but they were forming a picture he did not want to see. The wedding had not begun that morning. It had begun years ago, with a secret Jungkook had carried alone. Jimin picked up the hospital bracelet again. His thumb traced the printed date. Then he noticed something he had never seen before. On the back of the bracelet, written in tiny black ink, were the initials JP. His stomach tightened. JP Jimin Park. But why would Jungkook have written his initials on a hospital bracelet? The answer was hidden somewhere in the years they had spent avoiding the most important conversation between them. Jimin opened the next photograph. This one was different. It showed Jungkook standing outside a small cafe. Someone had taken the picture from across the street. In Jungkook's hand was a white envelope. Jimin recognized the envelope immediately. It was the same kind he had received shortly before Jungkook disappeared from the room. Jimin's pulse raced. He searched the box again and found a second envelope. This one was sealed. His name was written on it. Jimin. He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single page. There was a time when I thought loving someone meant holding on to them no matter what. Then I learned that sometimes love means leaving before your presence becomes the reason they stop living their own life. I thought I was protecting you. I thought distance would make things easier. But every year I stayed away, I understood something worse. I wasn't protecting you. I was punishing both of us. Jimin lowered the letter. His eyes filled with tears. He wanted to be angry. He needed to be angry. But anger was becoming harder to hold when every piece of evidence showed how much pain Jungkook had carried alone. Then the phone in Jimin's pocket vibrated. He almost dropped the letter. The screen showed an unknown number. He answered without speaking. For several seconds there was only silence. Then a familiar voice whispered, Jimin. His entire body went still. Jungkook. No answer. Where are you? Don't come here. Jimin stood immediately. Then tell me where you are. I can't. You disappeared from your room. Everyone says you're getting married. I find a box full of things you hid from me, and now you're telling me not to come. Jungkook breathed slowly on the other end. The ceremony isn't what you think. Then what is it? Silence. Jungkook. I need you to trust me one more time. Jimin's voice cracked. I trusted you for years. That's the problem. The line went silent. Jimin heard something in the background. A distant bell. Then a door closing. Jungkook whispered, I'm sorry. The call ended. Jimin stared at the phone. He knew that sound. It was the bell from the small chapel near the river. The same chapel where, years earlier, they had once taken shelter from a storm. Jimin grabbed his coat. He did not know what Jungkook was doing there. He did not know who was waiting for him. But for the first time in years, he knew one thing with certainty. He was done allowing silence to decide their future. The drive to the chapel felt longer than it should have. Every red light seemed to last forever. Jimin kept replaying Jungkook's words in his head. The ceremony isn't what you think. He wondered whether Jungkook was asking him to understand or warning him to stay away. When he finally arrived, the chapel was almost empty. The doors were slightly open. Warm light spilled onto the wet pavement. Jimin stepped inside. His shoes echoed against the wooden floor. At the far end of the chapel stood Jungkook. He was wearing a dark suit. His hair was neatly styled. His face looked calm from a distance, but Jimin could see the tension in his shoulders. And beside him stood another person. Jimin stopped. The person turned. It was not a stranger. It was someone Jimin had seen once before, years ago, outside the hospital. An older woman with tired eyes and a gentle expression. Jungkook looked at Jimin and said nothing. Jimin's eyes moved from him to the woman and back again. So this is it, he asked. Jungkook's expression changed. No, then why are you dressed like you're getting married? Because the chapel doors closed behind them, but Jimin could still hear the rain beginning again outside. He stood completely still, the old photograph pressed between his fingers, while Jungkook remained a few steps away. Neither of them spoke. For the first time that night, there was no excuse left between them. There was only the truth they had spent years avoiding. Jimin looked down at the photograph again. His younger face stared back at him from a hospital bed, pale and exhausted. Beside him, Jungkook sat with his head lowered, holding his hand. But now there was something else Jimin noticed. In the corner of the photograph, reflected faintly in the glass of a cabinet, stood another figure. Someone Jimin had not recognized before. He turned the photograph toward the light. Who is that? Jungkook's face tightened. That's why I brought you here. Jimin looked up. You said someone protected me. Yes. And you said I thought that person betrayed me. Jungkook nodded. Who was it? Jungkook didn't answer immediately. His silence told Jimin that the name would hurt. Finally, he whispered, your older brother. Jimin's breath caught. For years, that name had been connected to one of the worst memories of his life. His brother had disappeared after an argument and left behind a message that made Jimin believe he had abandoned the family. Everyone had told him not to look for answers. Jungkook had been the only person who never spoke badly about him. But he had never explained why. That's impossible, Jimin said. He left. He didn't. Jimin stared at him. Then where was he? At the hospital. Why didn't I know? Jungkook looked down. Because he asked me not to tell you. Jimin's hands began to shake. Why? Jungkook walked toward the window. Because he knew the people watching you were looking for a connection between you and me. He took the blame for something he didn't do. He made them believe he was the one who had leaked information about you. Jimin felt his knees weaken. He sat down on the nearest pew. Memories returned in fragments. His brother standing in the doorway. His angry voice. The sound of a suitcase being dragged across the floor. A final sentence Jimin had never understood. If you ever hear that I betrayed you, don't believe it. Jimin had thought those words were manipulation. Now they sounded like a warning. Why didn't anyone tell me? Jimin whispered. Because telling you would have put you in danger again. Jungkook's voice was quiet. Your brother disappeared to keep them away from you. I disappeared because I thought doing the same thing would protect you. Jimin laughed once, but there was no happiness in it. And both of you decided I was too fragile to know the truth. Jungkook looked at him. You weren't fragile. Then why did everyone treat me like I was? He stood suddenly. Do you know what it felt like? I spent years believing people left because I wasn't worth staying for. I thought my brother abandoned me. Then you disappeared. I kept wondering what was wrong with me. Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. Nothing was wrong with you. Then why didn't you come back? Because I thought if I stayed, they would use you against me. And if you left, I thought you would hate me. Jimin's voice broke. You were right. The words hung in the air. Jungkook lowered his head. Jimin immediately regretted saying them, but he didn't take them back. The hurt was real. It needed to be heard. After a long silence, Jungkook reached into his pocket and took out his phone. There's one more thing. He opened a video. Jimin hesitated before watching. The recording showed a hospital corridor from 6 years ago. The image was grainy. A younger Jungkook sat outside a room. His hands were trembling. Then the camera shifted. Jimin's brother appeared beside him. They spoke quietly. Jimin couldn't hear the first few words. Then his brother said, if he wakes up and asks about me, tell him I left because I wanted to. Jungkook shook his head. He'll hate you. That's better than him becoming a target. Jimin covered his mouth. The recording continued. His brother looked toward the hospital room. And if you care about him the way I think you do, don't let him spend his life waiting for you. Jungkook stared at him. What am I supposed to do? His brother answered, make him believe he can live without you. The video ended. Jimin lowered the phone. Tears ran silently down his face. He had spent years hating someone who had sacrificed himself to protect him. And he had spent years hating Jungkook for making the same decision. The difference was that Jungkook had returned. Why show me this now? Jimin asked. Jungkook looked exhausted. Because you deserve to know that none of it happened because you weren't loved. Jimin looked at him. Then why did you get married? Jungkook took a slow breath. Because I needed one final step to make everyone believe the past was finished. Who was the bride? There was no bride. Jimin stared at him. Jungkook explained that the ceremony had been staged as part of a legal arrangement designed to close an old investigation and redirect attention away from Jimin. The ring, the clothes, the chapel, the witnesses, all of it had been arranged to make the world believe Jungkook was beginning a completely different life. But the arrangement had one condition. After the ceremony, he had to disappear for a while. Jimin's face tightened. Again. Jungkook nodded. Only this time, I wanted you to know why. Jimin stepped closer. And you thought leaving another letter was enough? No, Jungkook's voice cracked. I was afraid if I told you everything before I left, you would follow me. Of course I would. That's what scared me. Jimin looked at him for several seconds. You don't understand, do you? Jungkook frowned. What? I wasn't afraid of following you. Jimin touched his chest. I was afraid you would leave without giving me the choice. Jungkook's eyes filled again. Jimin continued, you kept calling it protection. But protection without trust becomes control. Jungkook slowly nodded. You're right. For once, he didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He accepted the words. That made Jimin angrier and calmer at the same time. How long are you supposed to disappear? He asked. 3 months. Jimin stared at him. 3 months. That's what the agreement says. And after that? I come back. Jimin looked toward the rain-streaked windows. What if you don't? Jungkook's voice became barely audible. Then you should stop waiting for me. Jimin turned around. Don't say that. Jimin, don't. His voice shook. You already taught me what waiting feels like. Jungkook stepped closer. Then don't wait. What am I supposed to do? Live. Jimin laughed bitterly. You always make it sound so easy. It isn't. Then stay. Jungkook froze. Jimin looked directly into his eyes. Stay and let me decide whether I'm willing to take the risk. Jungkook's lips parted, but no words came. The older woman from earlier quietly entered the chapel. The car is ready, she said. Jungkook nodded. Jimin looked at him. You're leaving tonight? Yes. The answer hurt even though Jimin already knew. Then at least tell me one thing. Jungkook waited. When you said you loved me 6 years ago, did you mean it? Jungkook looked almost offended by the question. I have never stopped meaning it. Jimin closed his eyes. That was the answer he had secretly wanted and feared for years. When he opened them again, Jungkook was holding out the silver keychain. You gave this to me, he said. I kept it because I thought someday I'd be brave enough to give it back. Jimin took it. Their fingers touched. Neither pulled away immediately. Then Jungkook whispered, come back when you're ready. Jimin's eyes filled again. You used to say that when you wanted me to forgive you. I know. What does it mean now? Jungkook looked at him. It means I'm finally giving you a choice. The car waited outside. Jungkook walked toward the door. Jimin followed but stopped before crossing the threshold. He watched Jungkook disappear into the rain. The taillights faded into the darkness. Jimin stood there holding the keychain, feeling the strange emptiness of losing someone who had finally told him the truth. Then his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number appeared. It contained only one photograph. Jimin opened it. His brother was standing outside the hospital from 6 years ago. But this photograph had been taken from inside the building. Someone had been watching him. Beneath the image was a message. Jungkook told you half the truth. Jimin's heart stopped. Another message appeared. Jimin stared at the message until the screen of his phone dimmed in his hand. Jungkook told you half the truth. The sentence refused to leave his mind. Outside, rain covered the city again, washing the empty streets with silver reflections. For several minutes, Jimin remained inside the chapel, listening to the sound of water hitting the windows. He could have called Jungkook. He almost did. His thumb hovered over the contact, but something stopped him. 6 years of silence had taught him one painful lesson. If he wanted the truth, he could no longer wait for Jungkook to decide when he was ready to give it. He had to choose for himself. Jimin opened the photograph again. His brother stood outside the hospital, looking toward the entrance. The image was blurry, but one detail was clear. Behind him was the same black car Jimin had seen in the old video. The same car that had been parked near the chapel earlier that night. Jimin's heart began to race. He zoomed in. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat. The face was impossible to identify. But on the windshield was a small silver ornament shaped like a crescent moon. Jimin had seen it before. He remembered it from 6 years ago. It had been hanging from the rearview mirror of the car that drove Jungkook away from the hospital. He had thought it was insignificant. Now it felt like the missing piece of a puzzle that had been waiting years to be solved. Jimin called the unknown number. No answer. He called again. Nothing. Then another message appeared. Go to the old train station. Platform 3. You will find what Jungkook could not tell you. Jimin didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat and left the chapel. The old train station had been abandoned for years. The platform lights flickered in the rain, and the rails disappeared into darkness. Jimin walked slowly toward platform 3, his shoes echoing against the concrete. He expected to find someone waiting. Instead, there was only an old locker beneath a broken sign. Number 17. He remembered the number. Jungkook had once told him that if they ever needed a place to hide something important, they would use locker 17. It had been a joke when they were younger. Apparently, Jungkook had never forgotten it. Jimin opened the locker. Inside was a small black recording device and another envelope. His hands trembled as he picked it up. The handwriting was not Jungkook's. It was his brother's. If you're reading this, then Jungkook finally decided to stop protecting you from the truth. Jimin closed his eyes. He almost couldn't continue. The letter explained everything. 6 years earlier, Jimin's brother had discovered that someone close to their circle had been secretly selling private information. The person had not been interested in money alone. They wanted leverage over Jimin and Jungkook. When the hospital incident happened, the threat became more serious. Jimin's brother realized that anyone connected to Jungkook could become a target. So he made a decision. He would disappear, allowing everyone to believe he had betrayed Jimin. Jungkook agreed to help him maintain the illusion. But there was one thing neither of them had anticipated. Jimin had overheard part of their conversation before his injury. He had remembered fragments, but not enough to understand them. The confusion became the foundation of his pain. His brother had not abandoned him. Jungkook had not stopped caring. They had both simply believed that silence was safer than truth. Jimin's eyes burned as he read the final paragraph. I never wanted you to spend your life believing you were abandoned. If Jungkook is beside you when you discover this, tell him something for me. He did not fail to protect you. He only failed to understand that you deserved the right to protect yourself too. Jimin lowered the letter. For the first time, the anger inside him began to change. It didn't disappear. It became grief. Grief for the years they had lost. Grief for conversations that never happened. Grief for a younger version of himself who had spent countless nights wondering why people he loved kept leaving. Then the recording device clicked on. His brother's voice filled the empty station. Jimin, if you hear this, I'm probably already gone. But there is one thing I need you to understand. The person Jungkook is afraid of isn't coming after you anymore. That chapter ended years ago. The reason he still carries the fear is because he never forgave himself for leaving you. Don't let his guilt become another prison. Jimin covered his mouth. The recording continued. And if he tells you he is getting married, don't believe the ring. Believe the person who still carries your key. Jimin froze. His hand went immediately to the silver keychain in his pocket. His brother had known. Somehow, years earlier, he had understood exactly what Jungkook would do. The recording ended. Jimin stood alone on the platform, crying quietly. He finally understood why the wedding had been staged. It had never been about replacing him. It had been about ending a chapter Jungkook had been too afraid to close honestly. But there was still one question. Why had Jungkook left again tonight? Jimin took out his phone and called him. This time, Jungkook answered. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Jimin said, I found the recording. Silence. Jungkook's breathing changed. Where are you? The station. You shouldn't be there. You always say that when you don't want me to know something. Jungkook exhaled. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. Jimin's voice softened. Just answer me. Are you leaving because you're afraid? Yes. Of me. Of losing you. Jimin closed his eyes. Then come back. Jungkook didn't answer. Jungkook. I can't. Why? Because I already signed the agreement. Then break it. It isn't that simple. Nothing between us has ever been simple. A long silence followed. Then Jungkook whispered, I'm at the airport. Jimin's heart dropped. You're leaving the country? For a while. How long? I don't know. Jimin looked down at the wet tracks. Then why did you come back at all? Jungkook's voice cracked. Because I wanted to see you one more time before I left. Jimin's eyes closed. One more time. I thought it would be easier. Was it? No, Jimin laughed softly through his tears. Good. Jungkook was silent. Because it wasn't easy for me either. Jimin looked at the keychain. You told me I deserved a choice. So here's mine. I choose not to let you disappear again. Jungkook's breathing became unsteady. Jimin, you don't have to promise me forever. You don't have to promise me that everything will be perfect. Just stop making decisions for both of us. Jungkook didn't respond. Then Jimin heard something unexpected. A quiet laugh. It sounded broken, but real. You always did hate losing arguments, Jungkook said. Jimin smiled through tears. You always did run away when you were losing. Maybe I'm tired of running. The line went silent again. Then Jungkook said, I'm coming back. Jimin's heart stopped for a moment. Now. Now. You don't have to. I know. Then why? Jungkook answered with the same words Jimin had waited years to hear. Because this time, I want to choose. The call ended. Jimin stood beneath the station lights and waited. Nearly an hour passed before headlights appeared beyond the road. A car stopped. Jungkook stepped out. He wasn't wearing the suit anymore. He had changed into a simple dark coat. His hair was slightly wet from the rain. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Jungkook walked toward him. Jimin did not run into his arms. He didn't forgive him immediately. He simply stood there and looked at him. You came back, Jimin said. Jungkook nodded. I said I would. You said a lot of things before. Jungkook lowered his gaze. I know. Jimin stepped closer. Then don't say anything. Jungkook looked up. What? Just stay. Jungkook nodded. That was all. No dramatic promise. No perfect apology. Just two people standing in the rain, finally choosing not to run. The following weeks were not easy. The truth did not erase the years they had lost. Jimin still became angry sometimes. Jungkook still struggled to speak when fear took control. There were nights when old memories returned and made silence uncomfortable. But this time, they talked. When Jungkook needed space, he said so. When Jimin felt afraid, he admitted it. They learned that trust wasn't rebuilt through one grand gesture. It was rebuilt through ordinary decisions made again and again. A phone call answered. A door left unlocked. A promise kept.